Hello and welcome to everybody. I think that we do need to start. We've got a hugely busy, packed and important day today. So we don't want to fall too far behind, and I'd like to first of all welcome you all. It's excellent to see so many people here, and introduce myself. And my name is Suzanne Jeffery, and I'm the chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, which has organised the conference today. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change, which is the wider network that the Trade Union Group is involved in. I know that some of you will be familiar with the work that we've been doing, and others perhaps less so. I'd like to just point out to you that in your registration packs there's a fair few bits of information about the kind of work that we've been doing, and there's some further information about how you could get more involved. We have had several conferences. This is the, let me get it right, this is the fourth, thank you. This is the fourth conference that we've had. The previous conferences that we ran we're really trying to establish the importance of climate jobs, really trying to establish how much difference it could make in addressing the climate crisis if certain types of employment were created which could help us reduce our emissions. And to that effect, we produced the 1 Million Climate Jobs report. The 1 Million Climate Jobs report is now on its third time of publication. And I don't think it would be wrong to suggest that the 1 Million Climate Jobs report, in the way that it tried to tackle the issue and the kind of jobs that it identified, I don't think it would be wrong to suggest that perhaps that report and the work that's accompanied it has been important and influential in terms of wider debates and discussions and involvement within the trade union movement of really grappling and grasping some of the opportunities as well as the huge necessity that is there in terms of creating climate jobs. But the motivation really for this conference really comes from the climate crisis. Clearly we are in the so-called era of austerity, and the whole question of unemployment and the whole question of the difficulties that people are facing as a result of austerity is uppermost and in people's minds. But really it was the climate crisis that's motivated this conference. Moving on from our previous conferences, there is clearly a dramatic change in the situation, some of which have been modelled and suggested, and some of which hadn't. And I think it's really trying to ensure that trade unionists, environmental activists and others come together to have a really strong understanding, a really strong sense of what is happening, all the better for us to be able to engage with our friends, our colleagues, our fellow trade unionists, our fellow activists in ensuring that that is understood and ensuring that people are part of a debate and discussion, therefore, about how we best tackle that problem and do so with the kind of urgency and with the kind of immediacy that doesn't seem to be happening at government level. So that was really the motivation for calling for this conference. What we are hoping for from this conference, and obviously that will depend upon how people feel and the kind of debates and discussions that take place within the workshops. But what we're hoping for from this conference is that people come away from the conference feeling that they have actually broadened and deepened their knowledge and their understanding, but also have had an opportunity to perhaps offer up ideas and suggestions about how that kind of work, both a work in terms of debating and discussion, but also work in terms of promoting alternatives and ways of tackling the climate crisis, can go broader, can go deeper, can go right down in terms of into the communities and right down in terms of the trade union branches at a very local level, so that people are involved with that kind of discussion and those kind of campaigns. To that effect, therefore, we're hoping that from the workshops themselves, people should feel that they can make suggestions. There's going to be note takers in the workshops who hopefully will record those suggestions and will therefore allow us to write a small report coming out of this conference which incorporates the kind of ideas and suggestions that people have made about how to take these ideas forward. Last year, we produced, that's the wrong word, we took part in and helped to organise something called the Climate Jobs Caravan. I recognise some faces that were involved with that. And the Climate Jobs Caravan was an attempt to take the idea of climate jobs and the issues around climate change into the local communities. We had a van, and we travelled from city to city, hosting public meetings, engaging with the public. There's a report in your conference packs about the Climate Jobs Caravan. We certainly would like to perhaps think about repeating that exercise in some of the towns and cities that we weren't able to visit. It was hugely positive. It did allow us to create networks of people who are interested in campaigning around campaigns and campaigning on the question of climate jobs. Please have a look at that. If you're interested in perhaps something similar happening in your own community, please come and speak to one of the stewards or myself during the course of the day, or raise it in some of the workshops. It would be fantastic to be able to create really sort of networks and ambassadors for this kind of work in as many communities as possible up and down the country. Before I just very briefly tell you about the agenda for today, I would like to very much thank the unions that have sponsored the event today. The CWU, the PCS, the TSSA, the UCU, FBU and Unite. And they have been huge supporters of the campaign, and we look forward to working with those unions in a closer alliance in the future coming out of this conference. I'd also like to thank Richard over here. Richard's UCU group has a climate action network, something like that, climate action group that have provided the facilities for today's conference and a lot of the kind of infrastructure that's allowed us to organise the conference today. In a second, Richard's just going to have a few words, and then we go on to our main agenda. The purpose of this opening plenary is to really set the scene in terms of the climate crisis and the reality of what is happening and the kind of impacts. That speech is going to be given by Professor Kevin Anderson. Prior to that, I'd also really like to welcome and thank Sue Ferns, who's Director of Communications and Research, Prospect and co-chair of the Trade Union's Sustainability Development and Advisory Committee, and Sue's going to say a few words as well. There will be time for some discussion in this session if I shut up, and we have got a roving mic. It would be really useful if in this session perhaps we limit it to short questions that Kevin can respond to at the end of the session. Obviously loads of time for debate and discussion within the workshops. One final thing that I'd like to say is that our final session today is a question time panel. If you want to ask a question to the panel, please submit your question during the course of the day. There are slips on the desk where you came in, if you haven't got one in your pack, which you should have. If you do want to submit a question to the question time panel, pop that slip into the box which is on the desk downstairs, and those questions will be usual question time style, submitted to the panellists, and that will form the basis of our discussion at the end of the day. Once again, I very much welcome you. I hope that you have an excellent day today, and I'm going to hand over to Richard.
Hello, my name is Richard Payne. I'm the UCU Environment Rep at this university. So it gives me great pleasure to see such a great range of people from different backgrounds all here with one particular goal of combating climate change. So welcome, sincere welcome from the university and from the Lecturers Union branch. First of all, I want to just go over a few housekeeping details really. Fire exits and that sort of thing. You have got fire exits behind you if there is an emergency, fire exits here. If toilet facilities on this floor are near the lift and are near the stairs, the workshop sessions are in GO1 and GO4 on the ground floor. There are also workshops here. And there are toilet facilities in the open area there as well. There is also a canteen open, and it's open until 3:30, so if anybody needs fair trade tea, coffee, sandwiches and so forth, it's well provisioned downstairs, and there are plenty of, if you want a hot meal, there are plenty of little restaurants and so forth on the Holloway Road, and a very good Colombian one opposite the Learning Centre, which I recommend. I also want to just welcome you on behalf of Jeremy Corbyn, who has always been a steadfast and solid supporter of the staff here over the last few years, which have been very, very difficult. And he unfortunately can't be here today, but he did provide a message. Jeremy Corbyn, is the MP for Islington North, and Jeremy says, I'm unable to attend today's important conference. I'm honouring a long-standing commitment to speak at another conference. The latest report on the level of carbon emissions, he's referring to the record level of 400 parts per million, recently released, is both astonishing and worrying, indicating conditions may be even worse than previous predictions. It's obvious that we have to accelerate our moves to live in a more sustainable way and realise the world's resources are finite. I'm delighted the conference is taking place in Islington and commend the fact that it's bringing together climate scientists, trade unionists, environmental activists and concerned individuals to find common ground and purpose. It's important to plan how to deal with climate change in the interests of everyone and not just those who can afford to buy their way out. So that's from Jeremy Corbyn, and now, if you don't mind, I'll just say a few things in relation to the university. I mean, on the plus side here, we do have a sort of small group of climate activists who meet regularly, a climate action group, and we've also done some quite sterling things in the university in terms of a league table that we have of universities in general. This university managed to reduce its carbon emissions profoundly, and we're now number 4 in this league table. And that's an achievement which was brought about as a result of having an energy manager and a very, very good team around her. And actually, the union itself had some role in that, in terms of suggesting that the university did have an energy manager, and we pushed on that front, and this is a tangible result. But on the other hand, I think it's important to say that sustainability as a term is often very misused and abused term, and the problem as we see it is that it often conceals essentially a sort of cuts and austerity agenda. And here it's been used rather for the purpose of downsizing and cutting staff. And there's a real danger, the sort of narrow managerial version of environmental sustainability becomes an adjunct to a process of downsizing. And we're seeing sustainability, which is a superficially appealing term, distorted and employed to conceal this agenda. We have at the moment a strategic review which is out to consultation, and it mentions sustainability. And of course the first sustainability that is mentioned is economic sustainability. We know what that means. Generally it's about reducing operating costs, outsourcing, rationalising faculties, cutting the number of sites, and indeed this building here where we're now convened, this will probably be one of the last events to take place in this building before it's closed. Reducing and downgrading what they call their most valuable asset, that's us, the lecturers and the support staff. This is one area of sustainability that the university buys into. You can imagine what educational sustainability also means, because that means cutting courses, providing less facilities for students, cutting lecturers' jobs. Finally, environmental sustainability, which the union certainly supports, but how is that interpreted? Again, it's about cost savings, it's about a top-down technical sort of agenda. Carbon saving, yes, but really essentially driven by the goal of money saving. And I really think that these sorts of results are what management often buy into, less the environmental outcomes. And I think if environmental sustainability was in any way genuine, it would have, there'd be a priority to save our green courses at the university, invest in their most valuable asset, the lecturers, researchers and so forth. And it would put the concept of education for sustainable development really at the centre, at the heart of the curriculum. It would be a priority to provide access to the knowledge and skills that students need to understand and confront the climate crisis and give people the skills for climate jobs. It would not be about creating a smaller, narrower, more business-focused, business-as-usual university. So what is the good, really, of only reducing your carbon budget when really the really valuable contribution that we can make as a university in the field of teaching and research is neglected? The problem, I think, or we think in UCU, is essentially the market in higher education. What we're seeing is very much a two-tier system emerging as a result of changes, and a demand-led model. And this demand-led model essentially doesn't work. A few universities are basically playing a very important role, a leading role in research and education, crucial roles that can't be ignored. But we can't allow coalition policy to dismantle some universities and allow other universities to expand. We need a coherent, joined-up approach. We know that there's student demand for courses that provide a range of knowledge and skills for understanding and combating and adapting to climate change. But it is inadequate to respond to demand alone. The approach has really got to be concerted, as I've said. There are great courses, amazing research going on in the sector, but it's not enough for this just to be a niche in a marketised education system, a sort of unique selling point for some universities to outdo their competitors. And so these are the considerations that we face as a union, and we're trying to oppose. Sustainability has got to be on our terms and not just on the narrow managerial terms that exist at present. So that's all I essentially want to say. Again, a very warm welcome to everybody from the university, from the UCU branch. Fantastic to host such an event, and I look forward to hearing everybody's contributions myself later on. So thank you very much.
Good morning everyone, I'm Sue Ferns, and thank you for inviting me to speak at your conference today. I think the invitation went originally to Frances O'Grady, the General Secretary of the TUC, who does send her apologies. But she offered me the privilege and pleasure of speaking to you today in my capacity as General Counsel Lead on Sustainability, and as Suzanne has said, as co-chair of the Trade Union Sustainable Development Advisory Committee. Really trips off the tongue, that one, doesn't it? That's why we call it TUSDAC. Now, TUSDAC was set up in 1998 as the main forum for consultation between government and unions on sustainable development and environmental issues, so it has been going for some years. Your conference today, of course, comes at a particularly interesting time, following the House of Commons debate on Monday on Tim Yeo and Barry Gardner's amendment to introduce a decarbonisation target into the energy bill. And of course the Commons' rejection of that amendment is a huge lost opportunity. And worse still, it follows, as Richard has said, the news just last month, that atmospheric concentrations of CO2 reached 400 parts per million, a milestone that none of us ever wanted to see. And that happened just a few days after the death of Joe Farman, the climate scientist who first discovered the hole in the ozone layer in 1985. Joe worked for the British Antarctic Survey, and I'm proud to say that he was a Prospect member. And as Joe's work showed, a science-based approach is essential, not least to counter the spurious evidence put forward by the climate change deniers. Now, we all know that in those years since 1985 there's been political highs and lows in the UK and internationally, and unions have played a key role throughout that process. But it's an understatement, isn't it, to say that the self-styled greenest government ever, the coalition government, has actually presided over a catalogue of climate lows and woes. Now, at a time of continuing economic crisis and growing inequality, it's tempting for others too to downgrade the importance of action on climate change. And I strongly disagree. Climate change raises issues of social justice, quality of life, intergenerational and international equity. For us as trade unionists, it's also crucially about the future direction of our economy and the quality of employment in the future. And too often, politicians of all parties are missing the vital connection between economic growth and the green economy. The green economy actually is already a UK success story, employing just under 1 million people and generating around £12 billion annually from exports of environmental goods and services. There are over 51,000 UK companies operating in this sector, with overall sales in excess of 120 billion. This is a bit like the best kept secret. And what's more, output and employment are continuing to grow, in marked contrast to other sectors of the economy. But there's a but, and it's an important one. In the UK, we import more carbon than we produce due to energy embedded in imports of everything from food to smartphones to wind turbines. The UK's carbon footprint has grown by 10% since 1993 as manufacturing has hollowed out. So, while some people might be soothed by the impact of warm winters in reducing UK greenhouse gas emissions, we need to put this into context. As the UK economy has shifted from manufacturing to banking, we are now one of the world's largest net importers of emissions. And our highest green sector imports are for manufactured and semi-manufactured goods and services. Chief among these are solar panels and other photovoltaic products, wind turbines, alternative fuel vehicles including hybrids and biofuels. It's perverse, isn't it, to import wind turbines or electric vehicles rather than making them here. And that's why the TUC has also been arguing for government support for heavy industries, including steel, cement and paper, because they provide the fundamental inputs for a greener economy. What they now need is a long-term and sustained industrial strategy. One of the very good things that the last Labour government did was to set up a committee on climate change. Now, the Committee on Climate Change has identified 3 priorities for decarbonisation, and these should guide our work too. First is improving energy efficiency at home and at work. And unions working through TUSDAC have a good record in greening workplaces up and down the UK, and as you'll discuss later in one of the workshops, in reaching out to communities too. TUC is bidding to do more of this work in partnership with the European TUC and employers, with a particular focus on energy saving. And we've shown the importance of union reps as trusted intermediaries, which contrasts starkly with experience so far in implementing the Green Deal, which is hugely disappointing. Committee on Climate Change's second priority is decarbonising energy supply. Now, on the one hand, we can take heart from the fact that renewable share of energy generation increased to a record 12.5% in 2012, and that low carbon sources overall accounted for 30.7% of generation. Now, had it not been for the continuing uncertainty over the government's long-term energy strategy, performance could have been even better. The energy sector is of course never without controversy, and each source has its champions and critics. but for very good reasons, the TEC maintains active support for a balanced energy policy. And although this is a long-established policy, it's a living policy. For example, at Congress last September, the General Council and Congress agreed to apply a precautionary approach to fracking operations, taking account both of safety and the carbon challenge. The third priority is transport. Transport, like energy, is a highly unionised sector providing good jobs. Take just one example. The Institute for Public Policy Research, IPPR, has recently published a report on low-emission vehicles, pointing out that whilst Britain is the 5th best exporter of cars in the world, we're 15th in Europe when it comes to the uptake of electric cars and hybrids like the Prius. IPPR issues 2 warnings. Only a third of the components needed to support UK manufacture are purchased in the UK, and predominantly foreign-owned companies have choices about where to invest. And of course, the same is true of the UK's major energy companies too. We should all be thankful that the Committee on Climate Change was established under statute and that it exercises its independence robustly. As you're all aware, and as Suzanne has emphasised, the climate campaign needs all the help it can get. We're a broad movement and we must continue to build alliances. To influence political decision making, we also need to emphasise the opportunities for green industry and the chance to build a greener, fairer and more successful economy. Achieving a just transition will be challenging, and we know we'll only succeed by working together. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you have a great conference today.
So as I said, thank you by the way for both Richard and Sue, thank you ever so much for that. The opening session here, how serious is the climate crisis and how could it affect us, a briefing for trade unionists. This section is going to be given by Professor Kevin Anderson, who's Deputy Director of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research. Kevin will speak for quite a reasonably long period of time in order, and that's necessary obviously for us to do what we had hoped to do, which is give that sort of thorough understanding about what is happening. There will be some time at the end for questions, so if you do have a specific question, keep that in mind and we'll send the mic out to take those at the end. But meanwhile, Kevin, over to you.
Thank you very much. Right, I've got about 45 minutes-ish, there or thereabouts. This won't be a very uplifting talk, and it won't have many pictures. In fact, that's it. The polar bear.